Welcome back to the program. Let's begin on line number one and say good morning to the Liberal member for Burgeo-Lapoille. He's the Minister for Industry, Energy and Technology. That's Andrew Parsons. Minister Parsons, you're on the air.
Good morning, sir. I feel pretty special being the first one to start the new week.
Welcome to the program. It's the final full week of the year for us, so if you're looking to get on the program this week, today might be a good opportunity. Okay, let's get going. So let's dig in a little further to the numbers. Before we get into the market cloud, the market prices and escalation models and all the rest, let's just stick with the $17 billion over the course of now to 2041. It's hard to make the math work as easy as it was portrayed from the podium. For instance, the increase, if and when this makes its way from an MOU to a contract, is from 0.2 cents per kilowatt, to 1 cent next year. Help walk us through how we get to 17 billion between now and 41.
That is a fantastic question, and I certainly wasn't hired for my math expertise, so I don't have the schedule here in front of me in terms of how the next 17 years look in terms of that cost increase from 0.2 to 5.9. I don't have that here in front of me. In fact, there's a whole, array of information that I've got sitting in front of me. But one of the big things that I did want to mention here is that the question you're asking are questions that a lot of people are asking. The important part here is that I do think, and I know you've mentioned it, I think today, and you mentioned it Friday as well, I do think it's going to be important over the next period of time to be asking these, to be talking, but we're also going to do this in the House of Assembly, which I think is important. And hopefully, if, I know what my opinion is that we should have some of the architects of this deal, people like Jennifer Williams, to be there to answer questions like this, because the stuff that she did, and I'll use somebody like Walter Parsons, who's just a fantastic person within Hydro. They're the ones that have actually been working through this with people like Sabia all the way through. They will do a far, far better job than me.
Yeah, because even inside that, the different machinations of what was being discussed, where compromise was met, would be very helpful to come up with a better, well-rounded idea of where we landed. For me, even if you look at just 2025, if this becomes a contract, so what was $100 million in years past at 0.2 cents, even if we make our way to 1 cent incrementally to 5.9 cents, it still makes $600 million and not $1 billion. So I'm struggling to come up with the math for 17, but if that's not your bailiwick, I'll make sure I get, whether it be Carl or Walter Parsons or someone on.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, too, is that there are a lot of those very technical questions, and part of it comes down, I think, when you're looking at the CFL code split here, 2/3 of it are hydro, 1/3 is Quebec. Like, one of the questions I think I heard was that, we're saying 5.9, which is true. Quebec is using 4 cents. But both numbers can be true because the profits that in that case HQ gets back are rolled into the cost. So they actually do get a net 4 cents, but that doesn't mean we're not getting 5.9. But the fact is that, when you're getting into deals of this magnitude, of this specificity and intricacy, I do think that the people that were a part of that team, the Carls, Jennifers, Walters, and all the people, I think it's going to be important for us to allow them to be accessed, to answer some of these questions about, like you say, how do we get there, the process to follow here. I'll certainly be well briefed and ready to go when we go into the House, but I'd say a lot of the members are like me, that, there's a high level of things, then there's a next level, there's a next level. Trying to understand how you came up to something here is extremely difficult.
Right. The 5.9, as much as my math is not necessarily my strong suit, it feels like the 5.9 is the long-term number, which equates back, but it's all back-loaded, so it's really hard to know exactly how much money will come in the door, even though the escalator clause is there based on market pressures and market prices. So I will indeed try to chase that a little bit further, because that's important. Okay.
Yeah, and look, there's things too, like I think in the MOU there are different schedules that are a part of it, and I do think the price can change. It can be reflective on different things like, replacement costs of supply and what the markets in New England are saying. So in many cases, we have a general idea where the price is going, but there are factors that can affect it. The good news is that, and the big thing that was a selling point to me, because that's actually what I was getting asked the weekend. Quebec's getting it for this, and then they sell it for, whatever. They're going to make a fortune. Well, if Quebec outperforms, we actually see value and benefit from that as well. That was one of the big points for me.
Well, let's see here. The issue at 0.2 cents is that they were selling it for 51-time markup. So 51 times higher than what they were paying for it. So Quebec will pay an average of 5.9 cents per kilowatt hour, netting Newfoundland Labrador Hydro $1 billion per year to 2041. Every news release I see says that, but I can't make the math work. Over 50 years, Hydro-Quebec will have access to almost 7,200 megawatts on the Churchill River, which is also astounding. Even now with this new deal or new MOU, they still have like a 40% premium on what they pay versus what they can sell. And just for context, the Hydro-Quebec has a 25-year contract in the northeastern United States to sell it at 5 cents. So just to give some cost comparisons. Okay. The questions being asked of me are many, but I'll see how many we can get to. Let's go with the Labrador block, because it did kind of hamstring us for any real advancement. And we know the move towards all of the critical minerals, which we are sitting on in droves in this country, in this province. And we do have a geographically required relationship with Quebec in the Labrador Trough. Have we been turning away projects, or have we had big mining companies kicking tires but worries about access to power? Because the Labrador Recall block has now been quadrupled, which is obviously very beneficial, but has that been holding us back up until today? And how does that get translated in the world of the mining companies?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. And here's what I would say. I would not use the term that we've been turning anyone away, but everybody is absolutely, it's an active, like top of mind conversation with the companies, with NLH, with ourselves about we need more power. As you know, we were doing the transmission study to figure out, what do new lines look like? What are the requirements? In fact, any of the companies that were interested had to pay to get into the study and basically let us know what their needs were going into the future. So this is a big deal. Now, how that all works, the study's not done. We got to figure out, what do these lines cost? What's the cost of power going to be? So again, I don't think it's a case of holding back. But it was a big topic because, yes, these companies want to expand. When you're getting into topics like green steel and world demands and carbon reduction and all that, the fact is that we needed more access to hydro. So like I say, it's a big deal going forward and trying to figure it out. I feel much better now knowing that we have some timelines on the solution in terms of when this construction is going to start, when it's going to be ready to deliver. And again, so there's a lot of this going on sort of parallel. Like we were literally having this conversation. This gets done. That conversation will go into 2025. And we need to move fast because, everybody wants it now. And it takes a hell of a long time to get these things constructed. So that's where we're going next. So
Hydro-Quebec says they've got a target date of commissioning Gull Island in 2035, 11 years from now. Stan Marshall on his outgoing press conference guaranteed the province that Gull will be built in the next 10 years. The conversation that people are bringing forward to me, like I couldn't get out of Sobeys the other day talking about Gull Island. So for Hydro-Quebec to come in, they're going to bear the construction costs. They're going to bear all the risk for cost overruns. It's going to be a newly created entity with the same equity breakdown as the Upper Churchill. So 60-40 thereabouts with 60 in our back pocket. But yet, we're only going to be offered an opportunity to add inputs, offer suggestions. So the question would be, how do we have an out-of-province utility like Hydro-Quebec bearing all the costs? I understand all of that and bearing all the risk, but they get to be the person running the show, even though the paper says we will have a 60% ownership stake in Gull. How does it work?
So I think former Premier Grimes probably explained some of this when he was on Friday. The reality is that, and I think you even said this too, Patty, like we're not going to get into this sole ownership racket at this point for multiple reasons. Some of them are technical. Some of them are just political. I mean, we're literally coming off the heels of the last big mega project, which we took sole ownership of, and, there was a multitude of issues with that. As Premier Grimes said, Quebec is one of the, world leaders when it comes to construction. So we're fine with that. They are going to bear the cost of overruns. We're absolutely fine with that. But at the same time, we will get the benefits agreements. I don't think average person is too concerned with that split or who's going to do it. What they're concerned about is how does this affect them and do they have an opportunity to get a job? And the answer is positive on both, and it's yes on the second one specifically. Like there will be benefits agreements. I think the Premier mentioned it. The Innu are very excited. They're going to have an opportunity at this. There'll be Labrador workers, Newfoundland workers, Canadian workers. Just my conversations with groups like Trades and Now, they're extremely excited about the job prospects, and they're not going to get too caught up in the ownership structure. And look, if somebody can build it better, on time, and within budget, that's what we want. I don't think people want to go through the sole ownership question right now, given we're so close to the last one.
Well, it's hard to be the sole owner when we're not paying to build it. Okay, jobs.
Exactly.
The province of Quebec are historically protective of jobs. In fact, many out-of-province workers cannot get a job on whatever kind of project in the province of Quebec. What does the benefits agreement look like? Because I've heard references to it, but let's say, for instance, at Muskrat, it was Innu, Labrador, rest of the province, rest of the country, then international. Pretty clear priorities given to who will be hired and at what rate. What about this? Because Hydro-Quebec and the province of Quebec, their history is crystal clear here. They will select companies that are based in Quebec and bringing their workers in. How tight is the MOU? Because it looks a little bit loose on the jobs issue to me.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I don't think that's going to go away, nor do I think you could have the most rock-solid of benefits agreements. There will always be a question asked on that. I mean, anytime you see a Quebec license plate in Labrador, people are saying, well, that's a job being taken away. We get that. What I will say is that we're very happy with the setup that we have. And I believe it's going to work again. But it requires, constant vigilance, too. It requires constant working. So, again, right now, the main thing is we're starting from a place. We're starting from a premise that it will be, as you laid out, Labrador, Newfoundland, Canadian, international. And we will continue to monitor that. We're doing that with everything that we do, whether it's offshore, whether when we move into wind, hydrogen. There's constant monitoring of these agreements. So I feel solid with what we have here now. We have precedents from which to work. We have the agreement with the Indu. So feeling pretty good about it, but that doesn't mean that along the way that there will not be disputes or questions and things like that. That's par for the course, in my opinion. With
Gull being a separate entity, so a newly created corporation, why is there no opt-out or pause button on things like jobs? Because the Upper Churchill is its own kind of standalone with issues regarding another powerhouse, another 1,100 megawatts. But in terms of jobs, can we negotiate, or why did we not negotiate a potential stall button, a pause button, an opt-out clause if the jobs benefit agreement did not benefit this province? Because it has to. A lot of the benefit of Gull is for Quebec. So why is that not there? You would think that would be a real negotiating tool.
Yeah, and again, so I think a part of this is we have to look at it as a joint venture in the sense of everything coming together at once. So, and a lot of it, you've got basically, your 3-4 different projects here, different aspects. So some of it, I think it's hard to negotiate one specific thing and have it different than the other. But in this particular case, I'm confident with what we're going to have here that it's going to be, well, I say Newfoundland and Labrador, but in this case, I mean Innu, Labrador, Newfoundland. I'm very happy with what the structure is going to be. I'm not sure, again, there's off-routes and opt-outs along the way for different aspects of this. But the big point I think that sells it for me is that when it comes to jobs, we're going to be fine. I think I'm pretty comfortable where we're going to be.
Yeah, you said we started to negotiate things as standalones, but in essence we kind of did. The Upper Churchill and the implications there for money and or adding the second powerhouse is a kind of a standalone. And then you move to Gull, it's kind of a standalone. The two other transmission projects are kind of standalones. I know everything dovetails in some relationship to the ultimate end goal or the end package, so I guess there's that. How we spend the money. It's one thing for, as an individual or a business, to benefit because it's tangible, we can reach out and touch it. When it's government money, then there will always be the debate about how we spend it. So for some, well, I guess for me, we should never have another deficit again. The next amount of money has to chip away at the debt, and the next bit of money after that has to be to control Muskrat Falls. And no additional services and roads and all that kind of stuff, because at this point, I don't think we can afford it. What's your commitment as a member of Cabinet that we will have a well-articulated, understood path with how we spend the dollars, with breakdowns annually? Because 2025 is not going to be the same as 2039. So what's your commitment to give us a plan on how we spend?
Well, I'm certainly not going to make a commitment here today based on something that emanates directly from the Premier and then into Cabinet. I'm just one member of that.
I'm not asking about specific plan. I'm asking, will we see a plan that will be released and part of the discourse in the House of Assembly or shortly thereafter about here's what we will be doing?
Yeah, and again, I'll leave that to the Premier to answer that question. What I would say is on a couple of fronts here. Number one, just based on what I was hearing over the weekend, just hearing from people calling, people I ran into, I think every point you made there was referenced at some point. There are some people that want it all solely into, debt reduction. There's the Future Fund, which is factored in here as well, and we have a legislative fund there. How does that factor into it? But there is a reality, too, that there are many people, when we talk about things like healthcare and roads and stuff like that, there is an expectation there. So part of this challenge, I think, is communicating the deal first. And it's a good problem to have, to talk about money that you're getting and how are you going to spend it. I still think there's some work that needs to be done on that. I don't think that plan is completely laid out yet because we're just coming off the heels of announcing this MOU. There's still work to be done. Again, in my mind, I can see the argument for all. I think the big thing is that a lot of this money is not going to be spent by politicians like me. I won't be around. So how do we ensure the future of that? And at the same time, future leaders will want an opportunity to make decisions based on the issues of the day. I just feel that there's a big case. What I would say, and again, maybe I feel like I've got Siobhan Cody on my shoulder here. I think we have a massive debt situation in this province that this is going to give us an opportunity to remedy a lot of that. So we certainly don't want to see it wasted and tossed out the door for anything. But debt reduction to me is a big deal. But there are other issues that we cannot just say, no, we're not going to look at those.
Two quickies. This one is sort of a general question about the future fund that you just mentioned. So right now there's about $300 million in it. Help me understand the thought process. Because if we're borrowing money, which we are, how are we setting aside money for the future fund and continue to borrow on the other hand? It seems counterintuitive. Last year's budget was the first time in a long time that we actually didn't spend more to service our debt than we did on education, but we're setting money aside yet to be spent as opposed to putting that against deficit or putting it against debt. I'm just not quite sure I've ever really understood the thought.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it comes down to, and this is something that Minister Cody would certainly do a better job on. I mean, it comes down to, in many cases, what is the cost of borrowing? Does it make sense to continue to borrow based on what rate we're getting, et cetera? I'm sort of like you in my case, a basic budgeting point of, well, why would you continue borrowing if you have the cash on hand, the cash there? But that's a question that I'll leave to the economists and bankers and accountants and people like that to say, what do we do going forward? There might be a very good reason for it. I'm just not aware of it, and probably not the best one to explain.
General question, as was asked of me, can't tell you how many times since the deal was announced, is if you had to say to an individual listener, an individual taxpayer, what's in it for me? Will it be the possibility of lower taxes or controlled rates for my power bills or something specific beyond? There's a lot of money coming into the government coffers. Just speak to an individual listener when they ask me, and they're asking me to ask you, what's in it for me?
Well, that's a really good question. So, I mean, it's hard to answer that without remembering your question from 2 questions ago about debt reduction and things like that. And it sounds great, and it certainly does matter to some, but in many cases, you do get asked that question, what does it matter to me? What I would say to that taxpayer is we're going to get access to more money in the next 17 years and beyond, that we are going to have lots of options and lots of opportunities for people to put forward what they want. I do think that there's going to be an opportunity to affect people today with the issues that they're facing when it comes to power costs, when it comes to cost of living, things like that. But we have to make sure that we make those decisions smartly and looking forward to the future and not just doing it on a knee-jerk basis. So I think we have a chance to affect Newfoundland and Labrador as a whole. I think we have a chance to hit every individual and constituent in the province specifically in some way. But the thing is, we're not going to just do it based on what's necessarily popular. We have to put some time in to think that right. But I'd much rather be in this place than the alternative, which was nothing to look forward to for 17 years.
I know there's a cooling off period for people either as elected officers and or senior bureaucrats about lobbying the government. Is there and should there be a cooling off period for, say, for instance, I know you're not running again. I know there may be deputy ministers and or assistant deputy ministers or people from Hydro to be able to work in, for instance, whether it be the newly created entity ACOL or anything else that comes from all of this work and all of that what's in front of us between 41 and beyond. Is there a cooling off period or should there be?
There is. There's actually a piece of legislation on that. I think it's the Conflict of Interest Act. So there are specific provisions for cabinet ministers. I think it is there for senior officials as well. I don't have it here in front of me, but I know that there's specific legislation, and many people, when they leave government, make sure that they refer to that so that they don't contravene the law. Might even be, I think it's like a 12-month period. Maybe it might be longer in some cases are shorter, but I do know there's legislation there that must be followed.
Last one, promise. Does this deal have any implications with the challenge we're talking about regarding equalization? That's a good question, because in Quebec, they use the Upper Churchill revenue to artificially have low rates for hydro for their customers, and consequently, that has an implication with the inputs on the equalization formula. Do you think this has actual legal ramification regarding the challenge that the Premier's talked about, regarding the fairness of equalization?
Well, certainly there's a big question to be asked about fairness of equalization, and I'm hesitant to say nothing given that I do know there's some action that's been proceeding right now. I honestly do not know whether it does or does not, and I'm not comfortable speculating on that. I respect the fact, and I agree that I don't think that the process itself is done fairly in some ways, and does this have an effect? That's a good question. I don't have that in front of me, and I'm scared to death to go and say something without realizing the possible implications of something that a cabinet minister
it's
said.
going to have to, because, of course, if they're paying more for the power, will reduce the amount that they're allowed to exempt from the equalization formula, consequently reduce their equalization payments. It has to, unless the formula changes. And if it does, we can all certainly hope that it's still not as lopsided as it currently is today. Minister Parsons, I appreciate the time. Thanks for the call this morning.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye. Andrew Parsons, Minister of Industry, Energy, Technology. Break time.